Okay, a few words before we begin. The version of Nobunaga Ambition Awakening that came out in English not too long ago is the base game plus the power-up kit expansion. I already reviewed the base game when it came out last year, so this video will be more about what were added with the expansion and how they changed the entire game as a whole. I think it's better that I approach this review video that way because otherwise I would just be repeating 70% of what was already said in the old one, and I don't want to upload a video more than I need to. There are some terminologies in the game that I got wrong because I played the Japanese version back then, but if you want to hear how the base game was before hearing what I have to say about the expansion, then link to the old video is in the description. Now that's out of the way, let's move on with the actual review then. In my previous review, I criticized the game for having your officer's AI being too unreliable, and the game took away way too much of your control over the gameplay to force you to rely more on said unreliable AI. So, did they finally fix that issue in this version of the game? And not really. The AI still can't focus on one single enemy clan to suggest actions and make a lot of questionable unit maneuvering when marching in the overworld and while in battle. This was one of the base game's low points and it is still very much present here in this version of the game. They did, however, upgraded the civil system to give back a little bit of control over how to steer your clan to unification. You can now create a council comprised of conservators and overseers that offer various bonuses. The conservators grant a hefty increase in some aspects, but at the cost of massive decrease in some others. Do you want to stabilize your territory by increasing gold income at the risk of not being able to capitalize on the enemy's openings because of reduced number of troops? Or do you want to bum rush the enemy once and for all by increasing the size of your army at the cost of a massive deduction in supply harvest in the long run? Whichever conservators you choose to put on your council can massively influence on how you play the game. The overseers offer bonuses that open up more policies for you to choose, or to reduce the cost of the policies that you currently have, so the overseers are more like pillars that stabilize your rule rather than game changers that are the conservators. But some overseers do open up unique policies and tactics that you normally can't employ, so if you know what you're doing, the overseers can be just as much game changing as the conservators. Not stopping there, depending on the feats that the officers have done, they can be granted aliases that give further bonuses to that one officer, making them even more invaluable in your quest to unification. The aliases come in 4 types, corresponding with 4 stats an officer can have. Occupy aliases increase leadership and make units led by the officer be able to conquer enemies' counties faster. Battle aliases increase valor and make units led by the officer be able to dish out more damage to the enemy's units. Covert aliases increase the officer's intelligence and the restoration speed of various special gauges in battle. Civil aliases increase the officer's politic and the harvest of the castle the officer is stationed in, which admittedly isn't that cool of a bonus compared to the others, but still. Anyway, thanks to this new council system, the issue with the unreliable AI has been somewhat remedied because you can now cover up their shortcomings by employing the right people at the right moment. The expansion also adds in another system that grants you bonuses under the right condition, and that is the landmarks. Though unlike the council and alias systems I've touched upon earlier, I'm kinda indifferent about the landmark. Throughout Japan are various landmarks, and after you've fulfilled a set of conditions, you can choose to restore or upgrade the landmarks and get bonuses in return. Not all landmarks are created equal though, and some landmarks offer unquestionably better bonuses than the others. Like, what would a mere +1 or 2 loyalty of my officers do? What every landmark has in common though is the conditions you must meet before being able to take advantage of them, and because of that, by the time you manage to restore just one landmark, you probably are not even that much need of the bonuses anyway. It's nice that these landmarks are even in the game at all, but they feel so inconsequential that they might as well not be there in my opinion. Back in the base game, there were only few battles and you can only initiate those when the dangerous unit is available on the front line. Depending on the sizes of the armies involved and the results of the battle, your clan can assure their authority and steal away enemy lines in an instant, and have other clans as well as your own officers change their opinions about you. Although the battle itself can be a bit limiting due to it only allowing units to move in certain laid out rows, they can be quite intense and exciting when a lot of units are involved in the fighting. I also really liked how the battle results impact not just you or the enemy you're facing, but to the rest of Japan too, and I had hoped that this system would be expanded more in the expansion, and they deliver just that with the siege battles. A siege battle can be initiated when a defensive castle is under attack, and the battle takes place where the castle is situated, with the attacking units placed right where they were in the overworld map. This means that every single castle in this game is a unique battlefield in its own right, and not just that, the defensive bases placed throughout the field can be customized by changing the officer in charge of it too. Every officer has a defensive equipment attached to them, and placing them to the base will change the base effect, meaning that not just the battlefield being unique to the castle, depending on what officers the castle currently has, the castle's strengths and weaknesses can change entirely too. With the attacking units being divided into different directions that may or may not be able to meet up, and all the advantages the defenders have, a well-defended castle can take on an army multiple times its size. So if you're the attackers, you can't just throw all the soldiers you have on hand at the castle and call it a day. You have to consider your options, like ordering a few units to take the long route so you can attack the castle on all sides, or gather a few of your bigger but weaker units on one side so they can take away the attention of the enemy, while the rest concentrate the attacks on the other side. Or perhaps play the long game of cutting off the castle's access to their surrounding counties, thus haunting its crops, and employ various covert operations to destroy its defense before finally launching your attack. Just these points already make the game feel so much more dynamic, but the game doesn't stop there. Under some circumstances, like you've cut off a castle from the rest of the enemy faction for example, then when a siege begins, you may be given missions to clear, and if you manage to fulfill all the conditions, the lord of the castle will throw in the tower early and surrender to you, giving so much more life to the game as a whole. And all of this is just from the offensive point of view. If you play your card right, you can sacrifice a weak castle to reduce a significant amount of enemy troops, so that when your main army reaches the front line to face the enemy in the decisive battle, the enemy number has been reduced to a much more manageable number. And wouldn't you know, that's how the whole battle of Sekigahara plays out. A Nobunaga game that encourages the player to utilize common sense instead of just unga bunga everything. What more can you ask? Direct talk is a new yet not so new mechanic where you, as the daimyo, directly talk with the opposition, hence the name of the mechanic. In a direct talk section, the results of a success talk are written in the middle, and it's your job to raise a negotiation score to reach certain threshold to make the talk a success. You can do this by either comply to the opposition's demand or compensate with something of equal value or more. Depending on the situation, the difficulty to achieve a success talk and its outcome can vary greatly. Like in this talk, I'm trying to persuade an officer who refuses to join me, so he didn't quite have a demand and I'm free to offer anything to him. If I succeed, then I got myself an officer. But if I fail or choose not to persuade him further, then I don't lose anything because he didn't want to join me in the first place. Then in this direct talk with the Mori, I was the weaker Josukabe clan who was begging for a truce, so the opposition tries a very hard bargain. Not only Terremoto demanded me to submit to his clan, I also have to give him more of something else too, because just submitting alone doesn't push the negotiation score enough to make the talk a success. If I comply, then not only can I get away from the Mori's wrath, but I also can potentially gain their protection against other clans from the west. But at the same time, it means forsaking my current allies, one of which includes the powerful Oda clan. I choose the momentary gain by submitting to the Mori, but with the power of hindsight, we could see that was the wrong choice because in the long run, I have to face the Oda and the massive 90,000 invading army, spelling an early end to my Josukabe playthrough. On the opposite side of things, if you're the one pushing the enemy in and they came crawling at your feet, then you can demand some really outrageous stuff. just this one simple system makes the game that much more alive because it feels like almost everything in the game are constantly watching and reacting to your choices and actions, making your every move that much more important as they may carry some serious consequences that you could not foresee. Speaking of unforeseen consequences, I have a story about the Oda and the Imagawa that I want to tell. The Oda is situated right next to the very powerful Imagawa clan, and if it weren't for historical events favoring the Oda, the clan would be very at risk of being overrun early. In an Oda playthrough of mine, the Imagawa initiated an early attack while I'm still in the middle of building my bases. Since there's a very big difference in troops between the Oda and the Imagawa, the smart choice would be to negotiate with the Imagawa for a truce instead of facing them head-on. But in exchange for a truce, Yoshimoto demanded that I break my alliance with the Saito clan up north. This is obviously a very bad deal to comply to, because not only I would lose an invaluable ally that could help me with my first few territorial expansions, it also creates a potential new enemy in place of the Imagawa. So, seeing no other choice, I rejected the demand, engaged in a few skirmishes at the border between the two clans and reduced the troop difference just enough that when I next proposed a truce, Yoshimoto changed his demand to handling over a castle instead. I, of course, agreed to comply this time because it's better than potentially losing all my troops and more than just one castle defending against the Imagawa main army. Fast forward a little bit, the battle of Okehazama happens, Yoshimoto got killed and the Tokugawa breaks off from the Imagawa, leaving the castle that I gave up just now completely cut off from the rest of the Imagawa clan. Seizing this chance, I mobilized my troops to retake the castle and engaged in a siege battle. And because the castle was cut off from the rest of the clan, there were missions to force the castle lord to surrender early. And here's the thing, the lord of that castle was Naotora. If you're familiar with the Sengoku period, you probably know that her father was killed at Okehazama, throwing the E clan into a massive political struggle, and many more members of the E clan continue to be killed during the whole struggle. Even though I, Nobunaga, was the one responsible for the death of her father, Naotora agreed to surrender the castle and submit it to me. Through my choice of giving away the castle to Yoshimoto, I have created a domino effect that led to Naotora submitting to me instead of being stranded in the middle of the Imagawa territory, thus saving many of her clan members from the horrible fate that befell them historically. Telling your story via beautifully crafted cutscenes or carefully constructed massive paragraph of text are fine and all, but video game is an interactive media. Being able to create your own story bits via gameplay is what's so beautiful about storytelling in a video game, and I think this game has done a wonderful job of allowing the players to create their own passionate tales of Sengoku Drama, provided the players are willing to put in the efforts to fill in the blanks created by the gameplay bits. That is not to say that the game's actual story and writing are bad or anything, quite the opposite actually, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. In my own review of the base game, I praised the game for the quality writing in its historical events and remarked that one could seriously become a Sengoku buff just by playing this game. And while the writing still has some flaws that I'll talk about in a little bit, I think that statement is still mostly true. Not only does the game have a giant list of historical events to it, most of the events are also filled with additional explanations about the context in which the event happened, shed more light on the relationships between the characters as well as the political situation surrounding the parties involved. Some events also give so much personalities to the characters and not just cut and dry retelling of how historical events went. One of my favorite examples of this is about one of the most minor clans in the game, the Anegakuji, not doing anything spectacular but just changing their names of all things.
えが浮かんできたぞ。承知つかまつった。
I've had high praises for the game throughout this video, but of course the game still has quite a bit of flaws in it, with most of them already presented in the base game. As mentioned earlier, the officer AI still sucks mostly, and that's definitely not a good thing when the entire stake of the game was living officers who act and think for themselves. In fact, the living officer issue alone is a very big deal breaker that definitely will turn many people away from the game. Not only that, the living officer actively hold back the game's potential to be greater because it is very reliant on big numbers of officers to do even basic stuff like land development. And the ranking system makes it so that even if you're playing a large clan with plenty of officers around, you may still run into manpower shortage because your officers aren't high ranking enough to be assigned around. And despite having the AI supposedly doing the handiwork for you, there are a lot of unnecessary clicking that just drag on more and more as you get later into the game. While I enjoy the battle system, I can see many people not liking it because of how limiting it is, which can just be boiled down to moving the units to the right place at the right time, especially when coupled that with the bad AI that can be very easy to exploit if it weren't for the limiting role system in the battle. Because of the enemy's aggressiveness and the game's over-reliance on officers, it was very hard to play as smaller clans in the base game, and with the expansion adding in siege battles, it might as well be impossible. Thankfully, the game does have plenty of edit options for the player to somewhat balance the game out, but needing the players to do things to make the game not unplayable is never a good sign. Despite the game being marketed with an emphasis on officer individuality, most of the battle events seem to be more focused on the results of the battle rather than what individual officers did or what happened to them throughout said battle, leading to a few instances where the event results telling you that some officers perished after the battle, but you didn't get to see how they met their demise. I especially was very disappointed with events regarding the Osaka scenario. They just feel so rushed with only little context regarding the battles were given. Then you immediately get into the event battle with little to no focus on the motivations of the officers involved or what their last thoughts before leaving this world were. Freaking Matabe and Kimura were killed off screen for some reasons. Was the Osaka scenario hastily put into the game at the last moments or something? The way historical events play out is also handled rather poorly and misleading. For events that involve your clan, the events automatically play when the conditions are fulfilled, which is part of the course. For events concerning the other clans, you have to click on the hearsay notification on the left side of the screen and choose whether to have the event happening or not. Except that's actually not how it works. The events already happened and you're just choosing whether to read the events in details and not whether the events happened or not. In my old review video, I complained that the Toyotomi in the 1582 scenario expanded so fast that I, as the data, had no hope of fighting back. Back then, I failed to realize that the Toyotomi got so big not by actual expansions, but because the historical events gave them free territories in quick succession without me realizing it, which is just why? To be able to enjoy a normal playthrough, you have to disable the events from the event list during normal gameplay, but that also means disabling events concerning your own clan. You can still choose the events that you want to happen, but that means going through the event list and manually turning on the events one by one, which is just incredibly annoying. And then there's the English dub. I grew up playing plenty of games with bad dubs and I usually don't have problem with them.
You flaming idiots! Take this!
But when one of the first things that you hear in the game is this.
Shouldering both name and clan, I will advance. Shouldering both name and clan, I will advance.
I have no right to complain about bad voices since I'm the owner of a very shitty one myself, but I really can't like the narrator's voice in this game. Instead of sounding like a wise old man narrating a documentary like how it was in Japanese, the English one just sounds like he's grasping for air every other line he's speaking, and it's just...
A thick fog had coalesced in the autumn morning chill, enshrouding the force of 200,000 standing on the battlefield.
The English version of Awakening fixed a few problems from the base game and finally made the game good in spite of its flaws, but because of a wrong direction from the start, the game is not quite for everyone. If you can tolerate the bad AI, want a good challenge against aggressive enemies, a strategy game experience that relies on planning outside of the battlefield more than in it, or just overall a very big fan of the Sengoku period, then you'd be in good place with this game, but otherwise, it's hard to sell you on the game. If I were to give score to the game, it would be something like this. Why is Osaka written as Osaka though?